Welcome back to the Game Collection. Golden Sun is my most requested game of all time as of right now, so I think it's about time we give it a go. Let's find out if it's worth the hype. I'm SuperDerek, and this is Golden Sun.
Golden Sun is a turn-based RPG developed by Camelot for the Game Boy Advance. Camelot Software Planning was originally part of Sega, known as Sonic Software Planning. This is the same group responsible for the Shining Force games, Beyond the Beyond, and several Mario Golf and tennis games, some of which also have RPG elements. But that sounds like a video for another day. In Golden Sun, the story picks up with our hero Isaac and his best friend Garrett a few years after a tragic natural disaster struck their hometown. The two of them have been working hard to master Synergy, a psychic ability that adepts of the town are capable of harnessing. Under the tutelage of the town's scholar, Kraden, the boys are fast learners. One day, Kraden takes our duo and their friend Jenna up on a scholarly expedition up to Mount Aleph to try to uncover the secrets of the nearby shrine. It is during this expedition that two powerful scheming magicians, Satoros and Minardi, make their presence known, swooping in to steal away the shrine's elemental stars, causing calamity around the world, and in the process making hostages of Kraden and Jenna. Our duo, Isaac and Garrett, are charged with the seemingly insurmountable task of retrieving those elemental stars, Kraden and Jenna, and in doing so prevent the destruction of the entire world as they know it. Golden Sun tells a pretty standard story of a group of friends attempting to save the world, a tale of good versus evil, almost fairy tale-like in its simplicity. Along the way, Isaac and Garrett join up with two other adepts from two other tribes, Ivan and Mia. As our party of four adepts make their way from town to town, they encounter some small obstacles to overcome, dungeons to explore, and monsters to defeat. In some ways, this kind of storytelling feels a bit reminiscent of RPGs from the PlayStation era from Game Arts, not unlike Grandia or Lunar, which are my bread and butter. But in comparison to Grandia and Lunar, the lack of party character development holds it back from being quite as beloved, in my book anyway, and the dialogue can be incredibly repetitive. There were a few exposition dumps during the game where I even started losing my patience as the game would tell you what to do 3 or more times during the same event. Initially I thought maybe this had just been a localization issue, but the more I think about it, the more I think this is likely a target demographic issue where the localizers had been trying to reach a less attentive player maybe. But in that case, my advice would be less is more. Keep your dialogue concise so your players don't lose interest, and then let your players talk to NPCs again if they miss something. On the surface, Golden Sun plays like a pretty standard RPG. Combat is turn-based, where party member actions are selected all at once at the top of the round, and then the player sits back and watches all of those selections play out. The player is given options for attacking, defending, casting Synergy, which is basically the magic of the game, or using a Djinni. Djinni are where things become a bit more unique and can be thought of as magical spirits who act kind of like quartz from the Kiseki games. Outside of combat, Djinni can be assigned to different characters, and depending on what combination of Djinni are assigned to what party member, they'll be given different Synergy abilities available to them within combat and provide stat boosts as well. However, during combat, the player can choose to attack using Djinni in the form of using that skill that is unique to that specific Djinni. This unequips that Djinni from the character, which decreases the Synergy powers available to the character and deactivates those stat boosts that we mentioned before. So far that sounds like a pretty rough trade-off, right? But then the Djinni in the state can be summoned by any of the characters during combat. In addition, multiple Djinni can be summoned at once, which multiplies the power of the summons, or can summon attacks with different elemental attributes. Finally, once the Djinni has been summoned, it starts resting, and then re-equips itself to be reassigned to the character a few rounds later, restoring Synergy abilities, stat boosts, and everything else in the process. This means that during longer volleys of combat with bosses and other tough enemies, the player will benefit from using a cycle of attacking with Djinni for several rounds, summoning powerful summons, healing up as the Djinni rest and are restored, and repeating the process. This cycle of combat probably sounds like a lot at first, but you eventually get used to the rhythm of it, and the process is extremely satisfying, which will send players on a hunt to collect even more Djinni. All in all, there are 28 Djinni out there to collect, hidden in towns, tucked away in dungeons, and scattered about the world map as random encounters in specific spots of that world map. Speaking of random encounters, that's how Golden Sun handles things for the most part inside of dungeons and on the world map. There are some scripted encounters that take place during special events and such, but those are the exception. The encounter rate in these are slightly on the uncomfortable side of things from my perspective, especially since those encounters continue to crop up during rooms where the player is trying to solve puzzles, which is the bane of my existence. Luckily, later in the game, the player may discover a spell that can mitigate random encounters somewhat, but you'll have to experiment with the Djinni assignments to spot it. Worth it though. And since I mentioned puzzles, let me re-emphasize this. The game has puzzles. Lots of puzzles, and not just the typical Sokoban push block style puzzles that you might expect from other RPGs. These puzzles are actually more closely related to the equipment-based puzzles you would get from games in the Zelda series, except that rather than using equipment, the characters are using, you guessed it, synergy granted to them by equipped Djinni. And if you're wondering if using Djinni during combat and having them inactive prevents you from using that magic outside of combat for puzzles and such, I'd say you're catching on very quickly. And also, yes, I'm pretty torn on this whole Synergy Djinni system. I love the gameplay cycle this incredibly unique system introduces. I like the idea of mixing and matching Djinni to unlock different abilities. But this system also introduces what we in the biz call a foot gun. A feature that players are just as apt to shoot themselves in the foot with as anything else. Luckily, you can dig into menus and manually re-equip or unequip Djinni, but that's just one more thing to send players digging through menus, whereas I think it would have been better and kinder of the developers to allow players to use discovered abilities outside of combat without having to shuffle around Djinni and other equipment. The world of Golden Sun is a pretty typical medieval fantasy setting, complete with castles, caves, temples, and dungeons, but also shakes things up by introducing a few towns with decidedly East Asian influences. Some towns are pretty uniquely designed around different features, such as a town built into a flooded quarry, or a town located in a desert, for instance, but otherwise, many of these locales discovered throughout the game unfortunately kind of blend together a bit. Despite each of the lighthouses you visit throughout the game being thematically linked to different elements, the designers didn't really leverage those elements for inspiration beyond maybe a token water fountain or something. I feel like there was a lot of possibilities left on the table that could have helped make each area feel a bit more distinct and a bit more memorable. I would personally have loved to see the designers really just run with this idea. Musically, Golden Sun is a real blast. It was composed by Motoi Sakuraba, so fans of Tales and Star Ocean games will know what to expect. Sakuraba makes the most out of the Game Boy Advance sound chip and came away with some really great sounding music despite the notorious limitations of the hardware. By default, when speaking to NPCs in the game, you're also greeted with bleeps and bloops of various pitches, which can be mercifully turned off from the in-game settings, which is also a solid touch. Visually, Golden Sun is an absolute stunner, and the game features dynamic cameras which rotate around the action during combat, while presenting the player's party in the foreground and attacking enemies in the background. Camelot's art style and dynamic movement and sprites remind me of a highly evolved vision that was on display when I played through Shining Force on Sega Genesis years ago, and really helps sell the impact of each attack. Furthermore, those high-level summons look incredible and push the Game Boy Advance's limits to great effect. On the gigantic world map, I did run into a problem that is honestly only noticeable when playing on a TV screen, which is that when you're standing still, the camera has this judder effect and causes everything to sort of flicker a bit, which is extremely annoying. When moving around on the map, it's not nearly as bad, and it's a real shame because it kept me from ever wanting to spend more time exploring the world map than absolutely necessary. It might not bug other people though, and it certainly won't be noticeable when playing in handheld mode.
While Golden Sun is a complete game in its own, it still only tells about half the story, which is continued in its successor, Golden Sun: The Lost Age. It has a lot of really interesting ideas, and it's really piqued my interest in where the story can go from here, but that'll have to wait until next time when we talk about Golden Sun: The Lost Age in the Game Collection.